Hi, everyone. It's Natalie Tysdal. I'm really glad you're here today. Gut health is one of the most talked about topics in wellness right now, but most of what we hear focuses on quick fixes. Today, we're stepping back from the noise to look at what gut health actually means and why it matters so much for how we feel in midlife. This isn't just about digestion. Your gut affects your energy, your mood, your brain, your immune system, and how your body responds to stress after all those decades of busy living, medications, processed foods, and really just doing the best we could with the information that we had at the time. Here's the encouraging news. Your microbiome isn't fixed. Your body is always adapting, and there's more opportunity for change than many people realize. My guest today is Martha Carlin. Her work combines personal experience as a caregiver with deep scientific research into the gut-brain connection. We're going to talk about what decades of modern living can actually do to the microbiome, what the science says about rebuilding gut health, and the specific strains and tools that she's developed based on all of that research. If you want honest conversations that cut through the wellness noise, be sure you are subscribed here to the podcast wherever you're listening and stay connected between episodes. You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, basically all the social media platforms, where I share short insights and clips each week that I know are going to help you in your health journey. For episode notes, free resources, and my weekly email with links and tools that I'm actually using, head to natalietysdal.com. That's where the deeper support lives. And one quick note for transparency, you're going to find some links in the show notes today, and those are for Martha's products. I have decided to join her company as an affiliate, which means if you choose to check out those products, it helps support this podcast at no extra cost to you. As always, I only share resources that I believe are worth your time and attention and products that I personally use. All right, let's get started today. Let's get healthy and learn from my guest, Martha Carlin. Martha, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Natalie.
So gut health is big in my life. I talk about it every day. I focus on it. But for a lot of people, they're still like, what is this gut health thing? Why do I need to care about my gut health?
Well, it really is. If you go back to Hippocrates, who said all disease begins in the gut, I mean, it really is true. So going back to in 2005, I think the NIH funded a major study called the Human Microbiome Project, and that was a 5-year, lots of institutions around the United States, and there was one similar in Europe that kicked off this project of studying the microbiome, the, basically the bacteria, fungi, and viruses that live in and on our body. And it was running like studies in every disease you can imagine, in health states, and all of this, trying to look for patterns. So, fast forward from 2005, 20 years later, there is so much research now that connects directly to what is going on in our gut, to all these chronic diseases, as well as how we metabolize medicines, how we process food, how different diets affect different people. So it really is kind of the central hub of everything, which, if it makes logical sense because, we eat to stay alive and to fuel
Yeah.
ourselves. And where's that going? Right through this very important into the gut where kind of the factory is.
So are there things we can do to correct all the wrongs that we did? When we finally realize this, like, oh, okay, that I get it. Now I know I need to pay attention to it, but I did a lot of bad stuff. I took a lot of medicine, a lot of antibiotics. I ate a lot of crap food. Can we autocorrect? Will our bodies respond when we start paying attention to it?
Our bodies will definitely respond. There are a lot of things that can be corrected and improved. There are some things, like certain antibiotics, where the gut never fully recovers from them. So there's a book by Dr. Martin Blazer called Missing Microbes, which is actually what got me into the field of the microbiome. And he was talking about growing up in the age of antibiotics and how antibiotics are really connected to the rise of chronic disease because we're losing these keystone species in our gut. But when you start to kind of focus attention on it and rebuild your internal ecosystem, you can make a lot of progress to restore that. But a history of macrolide, that's a class of antibiotics. His research actually showed that the gut never recovers from that.
Oh,
So I think, when we have a situation like that, then we've got to start to understand we may have to do additional things as backup support because, we've lost some certain aspect of that function. But there's a lot you can do. I mean, I recommend there's a woman named Natasha Campbell McBride who developed the GAPS diet, or there's
mhm.
another group doing the specific carbohydrate diet. So often, kind of pulling back on these processed carbohydrates and restoring the gut lining with things like bone broth, so that the gut lining is really that protective layer that's keeping the bad things from the outside world from getting in. And when we start to get sick, a lot of it is related to inflammation and things that have crossed over that barrier because the barrier's not tight anymore. So, an anti-inflammatory or a autoimmune type diet, I'm not saying you have to do that along, forever, but taking those steps to restore that gut lining first is often really one of the best steps you can take before you try to, because you'll hear people say, oh, eat fermented foods or take probiotics, or, and I make probiotics. But if you don't have a healthy gut lining, you're going to continue to have problems until you address that issue.
Yes, I've talked about this for anyone who wants to go back and listen to some of the other episodes on gut health, on restoring that. I went through my own gut crisis, and restoring that lining was number one. All the other stuff isn't gonna matter. So go back and listen to some of those. But let's talk about some of the things people might see. I know that your late husband is an example of of an illness that he had. That's what turned you on to all this. What you can tell me about that, and then some of the things that we would never associate with the gut, but that repairing your gut might actually change.
So, one of the things with Parkinson's that nobody ever asked us about bathroom habits when John was first diagnosed, and he was diagnosed very young. So he was diagnosed at 44. Healthy
Mm,
marathon running athlete, and I'll tell you that connection here in a minute. But um, chronic constipation
mm,
is a problem with about 75 to 80% of people with Parkinson's, and it can go back as far as childhood, which it did with John. In his first 4 years of life, he was very constipated, and when we're not removing that waste, these bacteria are producing toxins. So, you have waste building up with a toxic burden in there that your immune system is having to deal with over and over and over again. And what we actually discovered, so I founded a company that actually started collecting people's poop, and I don't mean like a tiny little swab, I mean a box full of the entire sample. And in our lab, the people in our lab actually came to me after about, I don't know, 6 or 7 months of collecting samples across the population, and they said, "We can tell if a person has Parkinson's just by looking at their stool," because it was
wow.
like concrete. Well, that was almost 10 years ago. When we discovered that, there was nothing in the scientific literature about it. But, fast forward to today, I've been actually working on a paper with a Parkinson's hypothesis about what's happening with the battle between the microbes in the gut and how they spill a small amount of calcium and potassium into the gut. That calcium makes the stool like concrete, and the potassium, you lose the balance and you lose that electrical signal. So, for anyone, if you are constipated, if you're not eliminating waste every day, and this sort of drives me nuts because doctors well, first of all, they rarely ask you, but if you bring it up and you say, "Oh, I'm only going every 3 or 4 days," they'll tell you that's normal. Well, that may
Mm-mm.
be normal, but that's not healthy.
Yeah.
You need to remove the waste every single day. And when I when I talk to people, I'm like, "Do you have a pet?" Like, people know if they have a dog and it hasn't pooped today, there's a
There's a
problem.
problem.
So,
Yeah.
like, why would we be any different? So
Yeah.
that I think is, kind of one of the connections with Parkinson's that people often miss. But what I've also come to learn really in the last 2 years is this endurance athletics. So my husband was a marathon runner, and I have become friends with a young woman who has young onset Parkinson's, and she's also an endurance athlete. And when you're doing those kind of endurance events, well, first of all, there's a lot of carb loading, or, you're putting stress, electrolyte stress on your body. And then what happens is all the blood goes out to your muscles to oxygenate your muscles while you're running.
Mhm.
But then when you stop, that blood comes rushing back into the gut where it's been pulled away, and you get something called reperfusion injury. So as the blood goes back into those vessels, I mean, that's also what happens in a stroke. Is one of the problems is reperfusion injury when the blood goes back in too fast. And so that's part of what damages and makes that leaky gut. And often people who are
Mm.
runners will have kind of an inflammatory cascade a day or 2 after a major running event, and that's because the gut has opened up, and endotoxin from the gram-negative bacteria has crossed that barrier into the blood, and it'll go to your weak spot wherever that is. So,
Wow.
in
Yeah.
Parkinson's, that can be the brain, so you get brain inflammation.
That is it's fascinating to me, because I had a friend, who had a husband with Parkinson's, and he was an athlete. I mean, like, I think he did triathlons, and
Yep.
I doubt she's even considered this. So I'm very anxious to see in the research that you've done in this paper, if there's a connection amongst other things with that.
Well, and I over the years, I've interviewed so many people with Parkinson's. I'll kind of ask them to tell me their story, but if they don't say anything about exercise, I'll often ask. And I'm really surprised at the number of people who have done marathons.
Mm.
And that's
Yeah.
also a very pounding, a beating on the body as well.
Sure. Yeah, we think we're doing good with that extreme exercise. But let's talk about other things, though. Other illnesses. I know anxiety is one thing. Um, just illnesses in general. But give me some other examples of where someone might be sick and go, "Oh, wait a minute, the gut could have something to do with that."
So the pioneers in the field of that gut brain connection are scientists from the University College Cork in Ireland. They actually have a book called Psychobiotic Revolution, which is so interesting, and it's written pretty well for the average person who's not a scientist to understand this connection. So many of those hormones, neurotransmitters, and peptides are actually made in our gut, or the precursors to them are made in the gut. So,
Mm.
specific amino acids like tyrosine, tryptophan, and phenylalanine are made by bacteria in the gut, or we have to get them from food. And so, what can happen is, and stress runs the gambit. So, when most people think of stress, they think, oh, it's my tough day at the job, my boss, I've got too much on my list. But there's all these other stressors, like, back to the exercise, metabolic stress. That type of exercise
Mm.
is metabolic stress. You've got emotional stress like grief, loss, any
Yeah.
kind of what we went through during COVID is a
Yeah.
is a stressor.
Yeah.
Though those kinds of stress will signal and will make these stress hormones, but then what they do is feed bacteria in the gut that thrive on those stress hormones. And so then you get more of those bugs. They send signals to the brain and say, make more. And so you get this loop going. And so if you focus on the gut and settling that back down, then what you can do is kind of break that loop of what's going on in the communication from the gut and the brain. But, also cancer, so they've shown, and this is pretty well established now that an oral bacteria called Fusobacterium nucleatum, is one of the primary causes of colon cancer. So that bacteria getting into the colon, colonizing the walls, if there's loss of barrier integrity, it gets into the barrier and causes colon cancer. And there is a connection to another oral bacteria called Porphyromonas gingivalis, which is, the gum disease one, and that's
Mhm.
connected. They've found that in the brains of people with Alzheimer's. So, you could just about look at any disease state or even mental health state that somebody's got, bipolar,
Mhm.
things like that, schizophrenia. They're starting to connect what's going on in the gut to all of these different things through the metabolism of different bacteria and the interaction with the gut and the brain and the body.
So knowing that, having the information, I'm all about the knowledge, then what do you do? Some bacterias, you're talking about the bad ones, we connect them with the good ones or balance them. Like, what's a normal person to do to just avoid or be healthy?
Well, so that's the tricky part because a lot of people always, well, should I go get, my microbiome sequence or something?
Mhm,
And, most health practitioners don't really know what to do with that, or they often
mhm.
try to go the antibiotic route, which, can be more troublesome and cause more issues down the road. What I do say, like, these connections to oral health are very important. So, good oral health, making sure that you are brushing your teeth, but pay attention to your toothpaste and make sure it's not a toothpaste that has, like some of our toothpaste and mouthwashes have something called quaternary ammonium compounds in them. Or, if they're saying like kill all the germs, like Lysol mouthwash or that, that's actually very damaging to that protective layer. So you don't want
You don't
toothpaste
wanna
like that, but
you
you
don't wanna
want it.
clean your whole mouth out. It'll smell
Yeah,
good for a
yeah,
moment, but it's like an antibiotic. It's just like
right.
washing everything, even the good stuff, right?
So you need the good stuff in there, but, like, I
Mhm.
use these little wooden dental picks after I eat. You wanna if you're
Yeah,
not someplace where you can brush after you eat, you wanna just rinse your
get the
mouth. So
uh-huh.
good dental health, getting rid of, root canals because the root canals or metal fillings, those have a tendency to feed a certain profile in the mouth. I've actually
Mhm.
become really good friends with a couple of dentists who do a lot of work in this area and have had crazy results with, people with cancer who fixed their teeth and their cancer
That's
turned around.
fascinating. I
So
just
I
did an interview with a biological dentist, and then I just got a recommendation for someone here in Colorado, because for this very reason. It's fascinating and important. What type of toothpaste do you use, by the way, since we're talking about that? I don't wanna miss that.
I use a toothpaste by Himalaya, but I use like a tiny, tiny amount of it. And
Okay.
then I also like once a week I use I don't know the name of it. It's like a it's 2 tubes. It's by a company called Frontiers, and it makes
Okay.
chlorine dioxide, I think, in your mouth.
Oh,
And I
interesting.
use that
Okay.
about once a week. Um,
Okay.
and,
But basically you just don't want something like most traditional toothpastes not
well,
good?
you really have to look at the ingredients, because I've been very focused in the last 3 or 4 months on these quaternary ammonium compounds that are in
Wow.
so many of our cleaners because that lining, that's
Yeah.
very important lining is
Yeah.
damaged, and our cellular membranes are damaged by those cleaners, and so, just being mindful of that sort of thing and being mindful of the food that you eat,
Well,
eating
and that's what I wanna talk about next is, I mean, I don't wanna overwhelm people so much that they think there's too many things for me to remember. It's too
yeah,
hard. So if we're just simplifying this, but giving them specifics when we can, giving those
yeah.
listening, what are some of the foods to avoid and to eat more of?
So, sort of back to if you're at that phase where you need to restore your lining, you're
Mhm.
gonna wanna do some period of time where you're eliminating some foods that are fermentable, because that's what sort of feeds a bad profile. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. And then you want to start to add those back and listen to your body and notice, does this bother me? Do I feel worse? Do I feel better when I eat this particular food? I think that's one of the you have all these lists of people saying, do this, do that,
Mhm.
do this diet. What we've forgotten how to do is listen to our own bodies. Like, how
Mhm.
does the food I'm eating make me feel? But you are feeding yourself and you are feeding your microbiome. So when they talk about we eat a low fiber diet, that's because we eat so much processed food. But if you
Mhm.
eat a more whole foods, nutrient dense diet of, vegetables, meat, you're going to have more fiber because you're eating a lot more vegetables. I talk a lot to people on both sides of the aisle. I'm plant-based, I'm carnivore. Um, the microbiome is a diverse kingdom and it needs diversity.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I try to tell people don't be afraid of food, but also, pay attention, look at the label, try to avoid processed foods, try to eat as much whole, real food that you have cooked and you know what's in it yourself. And that's a path to a simple way to start to address things. And then if you want to get more advanced, you can start to follow somebody who is teaching about nutrition I love Terry Walls. She actually reversed her own MS through a nutrient dense diet. And she has a lot of videos and tools and ways to um, make
Mhm.
simple meals. She has a Walls Protocol cookbook that has simple. You don't have to be a fancy cook, and it has 3 different ways you can make it. One has more fat, one has less fat, and it's a very simple way to do that. I love that. And there's a little microbiome cookbook that I like. It's basically called the Microbiome Cookbook. And it
Okay. So
has,
simple.
you know,
That's good.
it has
Yeah.
recipes for feeding your microbiome, but, that is one that you have to be mindful if you start trying to cook things like that and you notice discomfort in your gut, maybe you need to back off and do that elimination a little bit and restore the lining
Yeah.
first.
What are some of the culprits, though? What are some of the things that are damaging our guts
Oh,
for all of us?
um, emulsifiers. So, you buy salad dressing at the store. You
Mm.
know, the emulsifiers that pull fat and water or liquid ingredients together, those are some of a tiny, tiny amount of
Mm.
those are damaging to the gut.
And
Sugar,
where else do we see that? Is emulsifiers like salad dressings and mixed products, so processed types
yep,
of foods?
sauces. My husband
Mm.
loves sauces. Um, you know,
Who doesn't
sugars,
love sauces, right? If you're
yeah.
not making them yourself though, right? Yeah.
Um,
Sugar. And what does
sugar.
sugar do to the gut?
So a lot of those pathogens that we talked about, the gram-negative bacteria that produce a lot of those toxins, they love glucose and fructose. And so you wanna eat as little of that as possible, to keep you're starving them, and that's why a ketogenic diet or people who do carnivore for a month say they feel so much better. Well, part of that is because they've removed all of those sugars from the diet, and so they're not feeding those bacteria. But there are a lot of other sugars that are in fruits and vegetables, and there's fructose in there too, but it's with a fiber. So, that will sort of change things up, but definitely avoiding, any processed sugars, you know,
Mhm.
soft drinks, Gatorades, things like that that have, very high levels of
Yeah.
sugar. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kinda crazy. I did a when my son was in high school, he came home one day with one of those Sonic slushies, and he doesn't even like sweet stuff, and it was a small one, And I looked up online and I was like, "We're gonna go see how much sugar is in that." And then I went in the cabinet and took and it was something like, I don't know, 16 or 18 teaspoons full of sugar, and I put it in the bowl and I said, "Do you wanna eat this?" And he was
And
like, "Gross, no." Well,
wow.
I mean, we don't think about that when we see,
Mm-mm.
like, grams on on a
Mhm.
box or something, and if you
Uh-huh.
can learn how to translate that and start to see all this hidden sugar, I mean, it's crazy the places they put sugar.
Oh, it is, and where it's so not necessary. It
Yeah.
just you just don't need it in that, but it just gives that extra little taste or
Well,
yeah.
it gives that addiction. So sugar
It
is an
is
addiction,
feeds the
and
addiction,
it's
that's
more
right.
addictive than cocaine.
Mhm. And then and you get the people then that they need it. They crave it. And as soon as you start to, I mean, we all love it, myself included, but as soon as you start to really get off of it after a few weeks, you'll find that you're not craving it as much. Just like an addiction of anything else, you've gotta get it out before you can, stop that feeling or that craving. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing when you don't want it. Like, I sort of fell off the wagon during Christmas, which a lot of people do,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then, I shipped some of my stuff back here, and everybody gave me chocolate, so I have, like, this bowl of chocolate, and I look at it every day, and I'm like, "I don't want it."
Yeah. Yeah. A quick break from the episode to talk about sleep. If it's become harder than it used to be, maybe you have trouble turning your mind off, or you're waking up in the middle of the night, or you're just not feeling rested, even though you were in bed for 8 hours. Well, let me tell you, you're not alone. Sleep changes in midlife. And when your mind won't settle, your whole body feels it. I've been using Blue Sky CBD sleep gels to help calm my mind at night. I take them 30 minutes before going to bed. And one thing I appreciate is that they contain no THC, which was really important to me. They are just a mix of CBD and CBN, which is proven to help calm your body. If you'd like to learn more, you will find a link in the show notes today, and you can use my code Natalie30 for a 30% discount. As always, talk with your healthcare provider, but this is something that has been working for me. Again, in the show notes, and be sure that you use that link and use the code Natalie30 to get a discount. Let's get back to the conversation. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk to you about is good probiotics. Now, I know you have created probiotics for this reason because you know they're good. How do people know? Because if you just walk into the store, Whole Foods, Sprouts, even you order online, it's overwhelming. And I think a lot of people get lost in the overwhelm and then they just don't do it.
Well, it's an interesting overwhelm because all of that space in the store when you go in and you see wall to wall probiotics, there are primarily 3 suppliers of the strains for those what you see on the shelf. And there are roughly 12 widely used strains. So you're looking at all these products on the shelf, but they're all pretty much the same, like a tweak here or a tweak there, because the strains are coming from the same place. And they're, yeah, and I'm not saying some of those strains aren't good strains, but they're not s- maybe specific enough. So what we
Okay.
did was we looked at, okay, the gut is an ecosystem. And we know from collecting poop samples and seeing what's going on in the research and in our own data across the population, people are losing certain kinds of functionality, and we want to try to restore functionality to the gut. So we used computer modeling to build teams, kind of like if you had a factory and you want to build a car. Well, you want to, the right people on the line to build the car. And so we build teams of probiotics that work together to produce something at the end. So, for example, our best selling one is called Sugar Shift. And so it's a 8 strain formula. 3 of those are proprietary to us. 2 of them you won't find in most of the ones you see on the shelf in the store, but they come from fermented foods. And,
Hmm.
those have been around for thousands of years. And what it does is it converts glucose and fructose, which is that bacteria that feeds the bad guys. And it's
Yeah.
also it's also the sugar that does something called glycation. So if people know HbA1c that they're testing for their, you know, whether they might be pre-diabetic or diabetic, that HbA1c is measuring basically sugars glycating that blood cell. And so our formula converts those sugars into mannitol, which we basically pee out, and it's a sugar alcohol that doesn't glycate. So we did a clinical trial in diabetes and showed all the main fasting postprandial triglycerides. We also measured serum endotoxin, which is now known to be one of the major risks for getting type 2 diabetes. All of
Mm,
those markers improved, insulin improved, and something called HOMA-IR. And so we went from that, our first formula, to looking at what are all these problems we want to solve. And so we have one for um, anxiety. It's called
mm.
Perfect Peace, which helps the gut produce those calming neurotransmitters that help us. GABA is a neurotransmitter that helps calm us down. And you could feel that one in about 20 minutes. Sugar shift, you're not going to like feel a sense of what it's doing, but that perfect peace, you're going to be able to tell. Or
That's
if you have a
great.
tracker, you'll be able
Yeah.
to see on your tracker. Simple Slumber, a lot of people have trouble with sleep. That product
Yep.
was designed as a team to help produce bacterial melatonin. So we produce melatonin, but so do bacteria, and tryptophan, which helps us sleep. And
Yeah.
so that one is also one you'll know if it's going to work for you. Doesn't work for everybody, but for the people it works for, the first time you take it, you'll know. And we have people with their Oura rings who show us their sleep data. They no longer have a sleep score deficit or they're doubling their deep sleep. So really improving on the sleep quality. We have one for if you've taken antibiotics that was designed specifically to help the gut restore post-antibiotic. It's called antibiotic antidote, and we're doing a clinical trial this year with that to look at
That's so
pre and
important. Yeah.
post. And
Yeah.
we have one called the Ideal Immunity that's very good if you've had food poisoning or if you're going on foreign travel. It's got a strain in it that you also won't find anyplace else. I haven't seen it anyplace else. It is our strain that came from a healthy gut, and it targets a lot of the foodborne pathogens like Salmonella, E. coli.
Mm.
Women often have trouble with chronic UTIs, so that can also maybe be a helpful one in that sort of situation
Yeah.
because it's effective against those pathogens that can attach to the uh, lining of the urinary tract.
So do you go in and out of taking what you need at the time, or do you need to get on a protocol and stay with it?
It really varies. So sugar shift is one, like we did our clinical trial for 90 days and then it was a double blind trial. At the end, we unblinded and kept a small group of people on for another 90 days. And so that is one where you continue to see the benefits
Hmm.
because you are really working through a modification of the whole ecosystem by changing
Yeah.
how sugar is working in the body. And that works for energy and sleep and brain fog. I have a couple of physician groups who use it for long COVID because it lowers those endotoxin producing bacteria that can help, make brain fog. Um, but like something like Perfect Peace, I mean, you can kind of take that as need. If I know I'm going to have a really stressful day, I might take 2 in the morning, or sometimes I just take one before I go to my yoga class, so I'll be a little more
Nice
zen.
and calm. But you
Uh,
can take more than one. You can layer them?
you can layer them. We do recommend because they're built as teams that
Mhm.
you don't take them both at the same time.
Yeah.
So, like, if you think about sugar shift, you take it twice a day, but it's also helping you produce energy. But if you want to take simple slumber, you want to take those a couple hours. That at the end of the
Mhm.
day, you want
Yeah.
to take those a
Sure.
couple of hours apart because you don't want to crank up your energy and then try to sleep.
Yeah. I'd love to learn more, and I will tell everyone where to find those with a link in the show notes because the research you've done and your knowledge is just so valuable. But thank you for explaining these things to us, for your time, and I look forward to talking to you again. This is an ongoing conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Have a great day.
You too.